Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Exercise is Bullshit. I'm your host, Logan Emmett Hurley. So excited to be joined today by a friend and colleague, Mike Petrella, a neighbor to the north. For those of you who don't know, Mike is the owner of STG Power, Strength and Power, and it is one of the, if not the preeminent strength and conditioning gym, probably in the entire continental U.S. or I guess North America. You're not technically American, but it's just a phenomenal studio. I've not actually had the chance to be there. I've just admired from afar for a long time. And this is my first time actually getting to sit down and chat with you, Mike. So I really appreciate you taking the time. Why don't you say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself and your gym?
Thank you for having me on, Logan. As you mentioned, my name is Mike Petrella, and I started STG Strength and Power back in 2006. It just started with a couple of old Nautilus machines and a barbell with some Olympic plates, and it's grown to the point where we're now on our fifth facility, or what we call our version 5. It's 4,000 square feet. We have over 100 pieces of what we believe to be some of the best equipment that you can find anywhere. Our philosophy has always been, if somebody create something or we find something better than what we currently have on the floor, we'll sell what we think to be second best and hopefully bring in what is the best. Had a lot of fun. I've been able to work with a number of people, all ages, all body types, all kinds of goals. And for me, this has just been an incredible journey, and I look forward to doing it every day.
So tell us a little bit about STG. You mentioned how it started just kind of like a garage gym sort of thing. What was that transition like for you? How did you make the decision that you wanted this to be a business? Where did you initially start getting some of those pieces? Because again, for nerds like me that are equipment aficionados, I look to your place as you have some of the rarest pieces of equipment I've ever seen, and also just some major brands that are just awesome pieces, right? That any gym would want to have and can still maybe potentially purchase. But how did you make that transition from, well, this is a fun hobby, let's collect some equipment, to let's have probably the best gym in North America?
So the first two pieces I picked up were a Nautilus pullover with the pull down combo and the Nautilus double chest, which is the chest fly, and then it has a decline press built in. They were purchased from Bill Casto, who at the time was in Rochester, New York, and Rochester's about a 3-hour drive from where I live. It started because I was reading a Mike Mentzer nutrition article, and I later found out from Dr. Ellington Darden Mike probably never wrote that article. But that led into learning about some of his training philosophy. And I believe it was Heavy Duty 2 was the first book that I read. That would be in, I guess, the high intensity library of books. And I believe his back and chest workout was a pull over with pull down, a chest fly into a decline press, and a deadlift. So I set up my parents' basement to do just that. And I really enjoyed those workouts. I'm still doing everything else at a commercial gym in my town, but I was really looking forward to it. And then I believe the next set of equipment I bought was a leg extension. Again, this was all Nautilus at the beginning, a double shoulder, plate loaded bicep, tricep. And I was kind of rounding out the upper body portion of what I could do. Then I've probably told this story before, but I'll just, I'll reiterate it one more time. I was looking for two more pieces of equipment to finish off my collection. It was going to be a Nautilus hip and back and a Nautilus leg curl. And then I think it would have had 8 or 9 pieces with the barbell. And that was going to be it. I was going to be perfectly happy. And these were all just for my own workouts. And I found this eBay ad in Sand Springs, Oklahoma for, I'll have to forget if it was 12 or 14 pieces at the time. And at the time, every Nautilus machine sold for about $500 American. Didn't matter if it was a rare piece, a generic piece. That market was so different back then, and a Nautilus machine traded for about $500. So the entire circuit was $1,000, which was just, again, cheap.
Too good
I mean, it'd be
to pass
insane.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be insanely cheap now. But it was very cheap at the time. I think it cost me $3,000 to ship it and $1,000 for the equipment. So it had the two that I wanted in it. So I made the deal, and I literally I had nowhere to put it. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know if I was going to throw it on my parents' driveway and they were going to absolutely disown me for doing this. I didn't know if I was going to get some sort of, rental space Like, and I mean rental space, not something you can use. I'm talking like one of those
Like a
like
storage
outdoor
unit kind
storage
of thing.
facilities. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But I knew I just couldn't pass it up. And as things tend to work out when you kind of let them, I ended up meeting a gentleman who's now been a friend for almost 20 years. He had a factory, and the factory had a fitness space in it that he had designed himself. He was a martial artist who had almost gone to the Olympics for judo. He'd actually trained in the same Olympic camp as Lennox Lewis back in the day. So he said, if you bring the other 10 or 12, whatever was left, and put it in my place, and you train me once a week, you can store it there. So that's what I did. I had my two machines, and I had this secondary place that was about, I don't know, 20 minutes, 25 minutes over from me, and I went up to his place once a week. So that room that he had was about 2,000 square feet, and it was a cool setup. But right beside it was another room that was 1,800 square feet that literally had garbage, corner to corner, 5, 6 feet tall garbage. I still have the pictures for people who don't believe me. And I approached him, if I cleaned it, could I set it up as a gym? And I was going to bring my stuff out of my parents' place because they were very nice to let me train in the basement, but I had overtaken their basement. It wasn't my house. So me and a bunch of my friends over the course of an entire month, and when I say a month, I mean almost every night, just finding places to throw out or move. Or there's a big factory, so we were trying to
What
get stuff.
was the was it just factory garbage? Like how did this room just turn into a storage unit for garbage?
That is a great question. That's probably the
It
only
just
question I've
started and
got.
just kept going.
I
Okay,
probably
no
won't be able to
worries.
answer that one. Hopefully, every other question you ask, I can. It was just, it had everything. It had kids' bikes. It had one of those. I don't know if your elementary school had one of those giant sinks where you push down on the foot pedal and you could have like 6 or 7 kids
Yeah,
washing their hands.
yeah. In that
It had
room?
one of
That's so
it had
random. Jeez.
it had one of those, and the thing is huge. It's like a giant piece of stone. I remember there was a giant safe. Had to have been thousands of pounds. At least it was on a pallet. Thank God. And I believe the owner still doesn't know what's in it. I think it came with the building, and it would, you need some sort of like plasma cutter to get into the thing. I remember we made piles of just wood, just scrap wood. We made piles of scrap metal, everything you could think of. But anyways, long story short, after about a month, we got it all cleaned up, put in a floor, painted the walls, and I ended up moving everything in. That was the first commercial gym that I ever set up. And that was kind of like an after hours thing. I had a full time job. My dad owned a car dealership, so I'd work 9 to 5 with him. And then afterwards, we would go up and train people. If I work 9 to 5, I'd go home and eat, and I'd try to have like a 7, 8, 9 o'clock client in the evenings, and that's how the whole thing got started.
That's awesome. That's very cool. So you got that. It makes me think. So I had a buddy we were actually talking about offline right before this. A friend of mine, Tom Fairbanks, that we both know. We actually, this is like my white whale that got away. I found this guy in Colorado that was selling 15 pieces of next gen, including like an external rotation, a double chest. He had a pullover. He had the super forearm, which is really the only piece I like super wanted, and it was 2 grand, but it was going to be $10,000 to ship it, and I had
That's
nowhere to put it.
that
So
super forearm is probably worth between five
it's
and
more
ten
than that just by itself. Yeah, 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 for sure. But it was one of those situations where it's like we're talking about the logistics of how are we going to do it, and finally I was like, I don't have the 10 to put up to pay to move it to justify doing it, and the guy refused to sell anything like by itself. So I ended up actually telling Bill about it, Casto. So I have no idea what happened to it, but that was my experience with similar experience of like I have to figure out a way to do this, and I couldn't, unfortunately. So that's the one that got away. But there's stuff out there like that. So just have to look. But it is rarer and rarer to find stuff that's affordable. So you've got over 100 pieces now. What kind of training are you typically doing at STG? I mean, obviously today we're gonna be talking about a variety of different training styles. But if someone was to come in off the street to STG, what kind of training could they expect when they came in the
I'll preface this by saying that we have a lot of people that come in that have orthopedic concerns. We tailor somewhat in that medical space. We do have a full-time physiotherapist on staff, and she's amazing. So I'll just start by saying, assuming there's no concerns, they don't have any sort of issues with their joints or any sort of limitations. The average person coming in just looking to get stronger, get healthier, put on some muscle, maybe lose some body fat with good diet, would be very close to a Dr. Darden full body, high intensity style training, where we would start with the biggest, strongest muscles first, move down to the smallest. Most people are encountering roughly 10 exercises. There might be more sets because some of the exercises are independent arm, independent leg. Obviously, if we're working a rotator cuff, you want to work the right and the left, stuff like that. But for the most part, it's a very Darden-ish workout.
Okay, so is that typically like a 30-minute session, or people looking at 45 minutes when they first come in? How does that setup typically work? Again, assuming they don't have crazy orthopedic issues, it's a healthy person coming in to work out for the first time.
Well, with your experience, you pretty much just nailed it right on the head. It's about 30 minutes. The first couple of sessions, we tell people we're not going to charge any additional time for it, but bank 45 minutes to maybe an hour because, of course, every time they get on something, there's going to be a trainer getting on first and showing them what to expect. There's a few people that are so well conditioned to the exercise now in terms of their cardiovascular function. And actually, I just have some people who hate the training so much they want to get it over with that they're closer to 20 minutes, but the average is about half.
In that time frame, whether it's 20 to 30 minutes, are we talking, obviously Darden's had his own evolution over the years. Is it somewhere still in that 8 to 12 exercise range, or are you going upwards of 15, 18, or is it a more condensed routine looking at like 3 to 5? What could the typical person expect from a number of exercises when they're coming in?
The average is about 10. Generally, we start with a motion that is very either quadricep dominant or just a lower body compound movement. Squat, leg press. Sometimes we open with a leg extension. We normally do calves and then something for the posterior chain, whether it be glute dominant or hamstring dominant. Then we generally train the back with both horizontal and vertical pulling motions any given session. The chest and shoulders is either an overhead press or a chest press, but they can always swap in for a lateral raise or a chest fly. Sometimes we do double compound, sometimes we do double isolation. It just kind of depends on the person and the workout. Bicep, tricep, and then at the end we like to do what we call like something you can't get at a different gym, like a differentiator. And we're really big on neck training. That's one of the things that people start with. We're fortunate enough to have all the MedX medical machines, so the medical low back is normally introduced pretty early on in people's training. So we have some cool forearm pieces that get intermittently put in. We do have a couple of ab machines. I'm not gigantic on ab training, but some people, of course, request it, and there's nothing particularly wrong with it. So just stuff like that at the very end that kind of rotates through.
I guess the question I've always wanted to ask you, Mike, because you do have so many. I mean, I think it's hard to like imagine if people have never been into, because people go into commercial gyms, right, and they see a lot of equipment, but I think the density and like the high level of equipment that you guys have is what really separates STG from other places. How the heck do you decide what do you how do you know what to put somebody on in the beginning? Do you have like everybody starts on the MedX leg press, or they always do the a particular style of squat motion, or like how do you decide, or do you just kind of make it up as you go of like they're going to do some kind of big hip hinge to whatever I feel like that day? Again, assuming somebody's healthy, right, and they don't have any restrictions that might limit the type of equipment they use. Because I feel like I would go in there and I'd be like, I refuse to do the same thing every time, because you could literally do a totally different routine every single time you come in.
So the way we would come up with programming, there are machines, and well, there's free weight motions too, but there's machines in this world that are really good, but you need someone with good coordination to get the most out of it. So just for instance, I have a couple of lat adduction machines, or Nautilus called them behind neck machines, and that's where the pad's set against your tricep, and you basically did like a circular motion for that. Yeah, exactly. I would say that 2/3 of everyone I've ever trained cannot do that motion appropriately. They let their elbows drift forward, they try to turn it into a chest fly, and they just don't get it. But for somebody who does have good coordination, good control, a lot of times they get on, they'll say something to the effect, I've never felt my back pumped up like this. So is that a good machine or a bad machine? Depends on the person, of course. So if I'm starting someone, there's almost no chance they're going to get that particular machine, even though I think it's good and even though that I use it myself. So we've gotten pretty good at figuring out, okay, there might be, say, 5 leg presses on the wall, and I might consider them all to be good. but there will be one of them or two of them that just happen to be easier to learn. So normally we're starting with the pieces that I feel have the easiest learning curve. And then within an exercise or with a set or two, it's pretty easy to determine where somebody stands in terms of what their ability is. I remember reading Vince Gironda talking about some of the amazing clients he had over the years, and they asked him, who was the most impressive he ever seen? And without hesitation, he said Carl Weathers, who just passed recently. And for those who don't know, he played the Apollo Creed character in the Rocky movies. Carl Weathers was a tremendous athlete. He played pro football. I believe he was a collegiate athlete at a very high level for several different things. He pretty much looked great his entire life. And, even just watch him as an actor in the Rocky movie. Watch him on his feet. That's not CGI. That's not computer stuff. That's him, and you can just see what kind of athlete he must have been. So there ain't a whole lot of Carl Weathers walking into your gym that you can just make him do anything. But when you're still dealing with populational norms, just right in the middle, there are going to be pieces that you kind of learn as you get going. It's like, well, you know what? There's a good chance this isn't going to be the exercise for them. Even we have a couple infometric pieces, and for those who don't know what infometrics are, you work one side of your body against the other. So if you're doing a chest press, the positive resistance of the right is supplied by the negative resistance of the left. Now, it's a very effective way of training, and there's no weights, external weights involved. You don't have to load plates. You don't have to put on a weight stack. You can make the machines cheaply enough. So it seems like, well, you can make the machines cheap. You can ship them cheap. They don't break down. You don't have to worry about resistance curves. You don't have to worry about anything. And just all you got to do is work hard. It seems like it's the obvious solution to several problems with exercise. But the biggest problem is human error. I'm sure nowadays you could put some force loads and some sensors and some screens, but the original ones, you just have to hope that the person is working as hard as possible. And people can, grunt and squint their face and they can make it seem like they're working hard, but, in most cases they're not. If you get someone who has the right mindset, you give them infometric machines, they can get tremendous results very safely. You can't get ever caught in one, you can't get pinned in one. But again, would I start most people on infometric chest press? Absolutely not, because they're just not going to get the concept. At least not at the beginning. They're not going to get the concept. That's maybe your job as a trainer to get them.
Yeah, I love that. And that's just a great explanation in general because I think a lot of people have the problem of looking at high level athletes and high level performers in the gym and just assuming like, well, that's what I should be doing. I should be doing these advanced lifts. I should be doing these super complex motions. And it's like, well, no, you should probably do the simplest thing first and get that down, especially if you've never worked out before. So I love that answer. I'd love to transition into, the whole purpose of this podcast. The reason that I created it is because I feel like there's so much misinformation in our field, especially. And I'd love to know, somebody who's got as much experience as you. I think it's super important that as we grow, we recognize and identify things that we ourselves have fallen victim to and pray over the years. What is something that you used to believe wholeheartedly that you maybe changed your mind or your opinion on in the last 3 to 5 years? Could be longer, could be shorter.
So when I was younger, I got into weightlifting predominantly for hockey, which is the most Canadian answer that I can give you. I, for whatever reason, went almost a decade without putting on skates. I just got busy, and perhaps my ego wouldn't allow me to go against lesser competition. Like I liked playing better people. I was never one that tried to get into the easy game. If there was a team that was good or a league that was better, I always wanted to play better people. So the idea of going into a beer league just didn't appeal to me for a number of years. Like I said, I just couldn't get into the mindset where I could just have fun playing the game, which has been really nice for me the last couple of years. I've gotten back into it. So I play in just a fun league. A bunch of guys that play baseball in the summer would say, "Hey, we should do something in the winter." And once a night or once a week, we get out for a night and play hour-long game. And for the most part, they're okay athletes, but there's two or three guys who played high-level hockey, and everybody else is just going out for a skate. And there's a couple guys, it's the first time they played hockey, and we do our best to kind of get them going, and they become better over time. But there's two or three guys who are pretty good, or like I said, played high level. At any given time, they can just take the puck and score relative to that level of hockey, and that's no fun. Like that. There's nothing fun about doing that. So in my area, there actually was a fairly big surplus of good hockey players. There are a couple guys, they actually went to the show. A lot of guys played high level junior, some semi pro stuff. And I don't know why there were just so many good players, but there was. And they have a once a year game. And once I got back on the skates, I got invited to play, which was good. And it was a lot of fun because the tempo was a lot more. And you're allowed to play hard. Like if you get called to play in the game, like hey, we're playing to win. Like you got bragging rights for the year. And even though I was in good shape relative to my strength training and I played hockey once a week, so I wasn't out of hockey shape, I can distinctly remember how beat I felt after that game. And I was probably one of the more in shape players that was out on that ice that particular day. So a lot of guys, they looked like whipped dogs after the game. And I remember thinking that, wow, I really, if I go to play with these guys again, I should probably do something that's more conditioning. And I would still believe that the best thing would be to get on the ice more, practice more, and actually do skating drills and stuff like that. But that's still expensive. Like that's the biggest problem with hockey compared to soccer or basketball. Where you can just basically get a ball and a pair of shorts. To rent the ice is several $100s. So normally you do it with a group of people. Most people don't just drop $200-300 and get to practice for an hour, right? Whereas if you have a net in your front yard, you can practice soccer or basketball.
Yeah.
So I kind of for years believed that whole, well, if you do the rush factor between exercises, then you're going to get all the cardiovascular benefit you need. Now, I don't dispute that. In fact, I will say that when I did play my highest level hockey, which was down in Texas, going to that tryout, I was training twice a week full body, and I had about 12 exercises down to about 18 minutes. And my resting heart rate at, I think I was about 228 pounds, was about 48 beats a minute. So that could be done. But I believe that that level of conditioning from the weights does take away from the effectiveness of the strength building and the muscle building. I find that it just takes up too much of the pie graph. And then adding in some sort of high intensity interval cardio, which I would have never done cardio, 10 years ago, to be effective. So I actually picked up a Versa climber because I think that is just the worst and best cardiovascular tool that's probably ever been made. I kind of just scheduled in on kind of like an off night, and I would do, more than 10 minutes of, 40 seconds off, or like you're just kind of moving 25 seconds all out for about 10 rounds. And even I was shocked at how well that helped my cardiovascular conditioning for hockey, baseball, whatever it is. I still don't put a lot of time into it, but I keep the intensity really high. And again, probably even 10 years ago, there'd be no chance I would have ever bought a Versa Climber. But even I was pleasantly surprised how much of a difference it made the next time I went on the ice playing like a higher level, faster paced game.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something to like specific interval training. My Versa climber would be the air bike, which I've not done recently at all because I have no reason to condition myself. But in my mind, that's like the ultimate, the way you just described it there, like the best and worst version of how to get yourself conditioned for it. It's interesting how cocky Jones was when he, would say things like that, like, you just go through as fast as you can, and who cares about cardio? It's worthless. And I'm sure now too he would probably have some adjustments to that mindset. But I think if you're not doing anything, like if you can improve your conditioning by decreasing the amount of time that you're going through your workouts, like you're definitely going to get some cardiovascular benefits. But if you've got specific goals, like you're not just going to strength train your way to a marathon, I think it's pretty clear that you have to have some specific adaptations for that. It looked like you were going to say something else there.
Well, again, I don't think Jones ever said that, the cardiovascular was worthless. He just, there was a lot of stuff in his time era where people were just talking complete nonsense. And for whatever reason, things seem to be self-evident to Jones. And I think that's the mark of a real genius. Like he didn't have to be told stuff. And although like, everybody, every great philosopher, they weren't right about everything. The fact that you're probably right 80 and 90% of the time and nobody had to tell you anything about that to get there is very impressive. Again, to get in the best shape, I did do what he said, but I just found that relative to what my lifestyle is, that doing it this other way. And I will say on a Versa climber, even though the resistance is static, like it doesn't get heavier. I get a tremendous leg pump after doing that for 10 minutes. And I haven't measured anything off to say one way or the other, but I do feel that my legs are actually a little bit more muscular from doing that particular stressor. I am still not a big fan of, say, going on that thing for half an hour, 40 minutes at low intensity. And the idea that somehow that's going to improve my cardiovascular benefit or that's going to have any substantial help on losing body fat. I don't subscribe to that. I just know that having something where I could keep my heart rate at that level for, about 10 minutes had a big effect. And I just prefer doing it that way than, getting on, say, a squat and doing a 20 rep squat, which will absolutely increase my heart rate, probably even to a higher degree. But then to just run over and do a set of leg extension, leg curls, I know that unless I have some sort of gigantic motivation, like when I was trying to play pro, I'd rather take the minute or 2 minutes before I go to the next set. So I'm not discounting the other way of doing it. I'm just saying relative to where my head is and relative to my lifestyle, it helped out a great deal. But again, just whether it be hard headedness or lack of experience, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have bought one. I just cardio machine, no chance. And so that's just one thing where I've changed in the last few years.
Yeah, I love that. Is the VersaClimber is this thing, right? Where you're moving your
Yes.
arms and your legs at the same time? Yeah, those are, I
Think
think I've
of
maybe done
Ivan
that once.
Ivan Drago,
Yeah.
Dolph Lundgren, Rocky Four.
Yeah, there you go. No, that's great. Okay, well, I'd love to transition into just some different training philosophies, right? So there's obviously a million different styles of training, but I think there's a few big categories that most people would say that they sort of fall under different camps. And I'd love to, there's so much nuance within these, but I'd love our listeners to have sort of a big 30,000 foot view of each of these styles and philosophies. And I think you're the perfect person to chat to about this because you've done a little bit of everything at STG. It seems like over the years, and you've obviously got your hands and experience in different things. So let's just talk about a few of these, and if there's other philosophies or styles that you think are worth mentioning as well, we can certainly jump into that. But I'd love to just talk to you first and foremost about powerlifting. Just in your experience, for anybody who's maybe interested or has seen people posting about powerlifting, what is powerlifting? Kind of define the sport for us. How would you define it for someone who's never maybe heard of it? Sort of the sport, the lifts, what is it all about?
Powerlifting is the sport of the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift. And ultimately, the total of those three lifts that you can put up relative to what your body weight is. So they have calculations at these meets. So, if you can lift 200 pounds at 200 pounds body weight, that's not very good. If you can lift 200 pounds at 100 pounds body weight, that's much better. You get 3 attempts at each particular lift. So if you hear someone say, I went 9 for 9, that means they hit all 3 attempts on all 3 lifts. There's different strategies, which I won't go into because it'll take some time. I'll take away from what you're asking about the training. But in general, you're trying to make sure that that last particular lift, your third attempt, is either very close to, at, or sometimes slightly over your absolute max in the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. Again, there's different ways of doing it. There's different ways we do it for beginners. There's different ways we do it for people who are more advanced and know their bodies a little bit better. So it's very interesting because if we were to talk about any other sport that you're not in the gym for, again, if you play basketball, hockey, soccer, baseball, whatever you might play, you go into the gym and you should be using the resistance as ways of affecting the muscular system. And you're trying to build muscle and you're trying to build strength. And then I guess there's certain people that still kind of don't believe this, but I think for the most part, the research has concluded, and Jones again saying this decades ago, that you want to practice the sport as it is. You don't really go to a gym to become better at a sport. You go to a gym to develop your body. So in this particular instance, the actual sport is the gym lifting. So that's where people tend to get all caught up in things where they say, well, from the high intensity community, they're like, well, you have to train too much. You can't recover. Well, the thing is, if I were to say, well, you want to be a basketball player, you might have to shoot 1,000 free throws every week. So maybe I do it every day to get really, really good at it. Now, if I were to say that you need to, deadlift, squat, and bench press multiple times a week, they would say, well, you can't recover from that. As well, you got to understand, you can't do maximum lifts multiple times a week. You can't do sets to failure, every single day. We would have a squat, a bench, and a deadlift day. So they're training 3 times a week. But if they want to go on their off days, take even 20 or 30% and just practice their form with the barbell, that technically counts in some people's eyes volume. In mine, it never did, because it wasn't designed to elect an adaptive response in your physiology. It wasn't designed to try to bury you under the table with a hard workout. It was, you need to be as proficient as possible at these lifts. And then when people got really strong, we're talking about drug-free lifters that are doing, the squats and the deadlifts in the 500, 600 pound range, that for the average person, their lower back's ability to recover became the limiting factor. When you start adding in the drugs, then you can push the ceiling up on that. But for the natural lifter, that was, again, at a very high level of strength, the limiting factor. So we would have people squatting and deadlifting heavy every other week. They could bench heavy every week, but they'd squat and deadlift it every other week. But they were squatting and deadlifting multiple times a week with lesser weight, practicing the sport. And like I said, there's all kinds of people that will hear that and say, yeah, that makes sense. But there's other people that will hear that and say that, you're overdoing it. You can't do it that much. And I can't stress enough that it's really no difference than stick handling in hockey or shooting free throws and in basketball, or taking batting practice in baseball. You have to practice. And that's where a lot of people get caught up. And then when it came to the accessory work, you got to think more like a bodybuilder. And again, there's a lot of people that don't like to hear that strength and muscular hypertrophy, although they are linked together to a certain degree, they are somewhat independent, especially when you get into these better and better athletes. And, the idea that I can take a weight, and maybe it's a lesser weight, but I can really focus on that muscle. I can really create that burning sensation. I can really kind of milk that particular exercise. That may be more beneficial for the actual growth of the muscle, but it might be lesser resistance, which would be, not as good for demonstrating strength. And I know there's a lot of nuance to that, but I think it was even James Loweneck, I say Dr. Lowenecki's research, where he was showing that, there's not as much correlation between strength and hypertrophy as we once thought. Now, I still think getting stronger in the gym over time is an acceptable method of hypertrophy, but if I was dealing with a bodybuilder, it wouldn't be the only avenue that I'd be approaching.
So with that in mind, I think that's a fantastic answer. Again, there's so much confusion when people are first starting out. They see the biggest, the strongest, and that could be the bodybuilders. It could be the people who are powerlifting. Who do you think this style of training is good for? Like, who would be the best person who maybe should start on a powerlifting program? I have my version of this answer, but I'd be interested to hear yours.
Generally, they should be shorter. So if
Better mechanical leverage?
Yes, exactly. So just I'll give you just a quick for that. If you were 7 feet tall, you should probably go play basketball because you'd have just a gigantic advantage over everybody else. There are formulas which I discussed earlier for how good you are as a lifter. The main one's called the Wilks formula. I know there's different ones out there. And again, it's how much weight you lift against your body weight. There's other ones that have ages built in and stuff like that. But I can remember I had a young man who trained with me, and he became the national high school champion as a senior. So he was a good lifter. And he actually went on to be an RPS world champion. So, I mean, this is a good lifter. And I had taught him about, genetics and what you'd look for in finding a lifter and stuff like that. And he came to me and he said, well, if you think I'm good, you need to meet this other kid. And anyways, he brought him into the gym, and he said he was 5'3". I think he was probably closer to 5'2", but he had a great build, wide shoulders, short in the legs, short in the arms. Kind of looked like Mighty Mouse. And I can remember one of the first things I said to him. I said, kid, if you train here, you'll never lose a powerlifting meet in your life, because it was the prototypical what you wanted in a power lifter. And not only did he never lose, just like I said, they have best lifters at meets, where essentially they take that formula and they put it up against everyone in the meet. So a good meets 120, 140 lifters. And he never did a meet where he wasn't the best overall lifter. And this was even against guys who were undrug tested. Because in powerlifting, you have professional and amateur. And the only difference between professional and amateur is whether you're subjecting yourself to drug testing. So I can remember the first time he lined up for a 3 times body weight squat. So he was, I think, 123 that day, and he had just a smidge under 400 on the bar. And
Gosh.
one of the co-captains of the team, he was a big guy. He was a multi-time national champion in the bench press. And we looked at each other. We looked at this bar, and I'm thinking, this is about the most I ever did at like 220, 230 body weight. I think I did like a 420 once or something like that. And I can remember how heavy that felt. And here's a guy who's a foot shorter than me, 100 pounds lighter than me, and he's about to put this weight on his back. And I can remember I looked at him and said, this is 3 times body weight. And he says, "Are you going to tell him?" I said, "No, I'm not going to tell him." I said, "No, I'm not going to tell him either." And sure enough, he got it. And like I said, in terms of like just not just the eye test, but mathematically, he was the best lifter I ever trained. But he was short, and it certainly helped. Again, not to say he couldn't play basketball, but he's going to have a heck of a time doing it. Whereas if you bring him into powerlifting, he's like, "Oh man, you just have all the goods. You're ready to go." And he was smart. He was disciplined. He was a very good trainee, a very good friend, a very good client, and he was able to accomplish a lot through his hard work and determination. One look, and it's like, hey, you're made for this. For the people who don't know, I'm about 6'4", and I've said this multiple times. If you ever see me squat with just an empty barbell, it's ugly. I'm bent way at the hips, and I don't care what people say about, get more hip mobility, more ankle mobility. It's just simple physics. Like I don't have mobility problems. There's people that they do have mobility issues, and work on that stuff will help. But it's just I have even exceptionally long femurs for someone who's my height. My torso height is probably around average, and I know that because whenever I set up the machines for a giant cross section of the population, anything upper body, I'm just kind of in the average range. But everything in the lower body, I generally got to set the seat all the way back or further back than most other people that I train. So certainly short people is the big one for powerlifting, but also those lifts, especially the squat and the deadlift, they are so systematically taxing on the body that I don't feel they have a great place for the average person because they're just not willing to do what it takes to recover from it. They don't want to eat the part. They don't want to sleep the part. And, when you get up to pretty high levels of strength, it knocks you out for a day or two. It certainly can knock you out for a day or two. I don't think that's needed for the average person. Again, I talked about 20 rep squats a little bit earlier. I've done programs on that, and it works. I don't think it's the greatest program of all time, like some people tend to. But even if it was the absolute greatest thing you could possibly do, you have to be committed to it. If you think you're going to walk out of the gym and eat haphazardly and go party all night and somehow reap the benefits of that particular stressor, you're out of your mind. So, the whole powerlifting thing it's a lifestyle. To be good, it's a lifestyle, just like bodybuilding is a lifestyle. It's not going to fit into the average person's routine. You need to be thinking about your recovery and the things that go along with it if you're going to reap the benefits of those exercises.
Yeah, and you said so many important things there, and I think the big ones are mainly focusing on the fact that it's a sport, right? So, well, incorporating squats and deadlifts and bench press, I think, are can be a great part of somebody's routine from time to time, as part of a certain rotation of other exercises. I don't think by any means, and I think you would probably agree that they're maybe the best exercises for hypertrophy. Potentially, they're the best exercises for strength in those particular exercises, right? If you want to get really good at the bench press, you have to practice the bench press. But if you want to get as big and strong as in your chest as possible, maybe a barbell bench press isn't the best exercise. But I think so many people get confused with seeing strong people and assuming that they have to do those particular things, completely ignoring things like genetics. And the best powerlifters in the world all have pretty similar genetic builds, right? I think the best example I've ever seen, and I know Doug McGuff talks about this, is with swimmers, right? So if you look at the genetics of swimmers and you look at middle school swimmers, body types are all over the place, right? I mean, there's short and fat, there's tall and skinny. You go to the next level, you go to high school, there's starting to be a little more homogeneity, right, between people. You go to college, they're looking very, very similar. And then by the time you get to the Olympics, I mean, you could literally Photoshop the guys' heads from one to the other, and assuming that they're all the same race, they probably couldn't even tell themselves apart, right? Like that's how similar the phenotypes are when you get to that point. And I think people that's lost on people sometimes. Of oh no, you become a a bodybuilder, you become a power lifter because you worked hard. It's like, well, that's part of it. That's a very important part of it, right? But genetics play a role too. Anything else to add on that before we move on?
Well, first of all, you're 100% correct in your assertions there. Getting back to that one powerlifter who did so well. So in the world of powerlifting, the biggest organization is called the IPF. They've been trying to get into the Olympics for years and years and years. Now, in that particular year, when this lifter was doing so well, the world championship for that organization, I want to say, it was in the Czech Republic. It was definitely somewhere like over in Europe. It wasn't like we could just drive there, or was in the U.S. or anything like that. So if you are the world champion of powerlifting, that's nothing. That's something you do on a weekend. They don't get paid money like some of the bigger major sports. And outside of powerlifting, if you say the name Ed Cohen, for those who don't know, is probably the greatest powerlifter ever. The Wayne Gretzky of powerlifting. He could walk down any road and no one would ever know. Oh, he's older now because it's a thick guy, but no one would ever know who he is. But he was just a dominant champion for years and years and years. So anyways, long story short, he didn't go to it. But the total difference between my guy and the champion, the IPF champion, his age and weight, there was a 5 pound difference. And my guy actually had the 5 pounds better. Now, that doesn't make my guy champion because you still got to compete the day of. Maybe that level of competition would have made him better. Maybe it would have sunk him. That's the whole point of competition. He was right there with him. They were pretty much carbon copies of each other. I got a picture of this guy. They were the same height, because again, if you're 2-3 inches taller, you got to move that weight 2 to 3 inches more. So, the guy who's the champion at 132, 148, 165, generally it's like the shortest guy that's there with a muscular build. You don't see 6 foot tall middleweight powerlifting champions. They don't exist. If you're over 6 foot tall, you pretty much have to eat yourself up to super heavyweight, or you have no chance. Some of them are good in the deadlift, but again, like they got the long arms. But in the squat, they just get absolutely buried by them. So you're absolutely right about the body types playing just a huge, huge role at the higher end of things. And to touch on what you were talking about, the maybe the bench press isn't the best chest exercise, or the squat's not the best hypertrophy exercise. I've been very fortunate to have several very good mentors over the years that have taught me a lot. Unfortunately, I just in the last year and a bit, two of them have passed away, and Roger Schwab and Doug Brignoli. And these were very, very intelligent men, very generous with their time with me. And I was fortunate enough to call them friends. Doug put out a book about a year before he passed. It was all about biomechanics in exercise, and it was geared towards what would be the best possible exercises for muscular hypertrophy. And he would break it down into 16 different factors. And for those who haven't read it, it's I'll probably get the title wrong. The physics of exercise, physics and biomechanics of exercise. I forget. It was his last book before he passed. You can get it on Amazon. I think it's a must reading for anybody who touches a weight. It is that good. It is that well thought out. And he was looking at a lot of the sacred cows that you need to bench press to get a big chest. And he talked about why you don't need to bench press at all to build a chest. And he would talk about the primary function of the chest, as most people know, is to adduct the arms across the front of the body. He says on a bench press, it's actually worse because on the bench press bar, it's generally knurled, and it's knurled to keep your hands in place. But if you actually put oil on the bar so it was slick, your arms wouldn't adduct. They would actually move in the opposite direction. They would slide off to the collars. So you're actually moving in the wrong direction relative to how the muscle of the chest wants to contract. Not say you can't build a chest by bench pressing. It's not say it's necessarily a dangerous exercise, but when you break down the physics of it at best is an acceptable exercise for the chest. And even just getting on a machine, he liked the decline as the preferred angle, and having a converging movement arm was a far superior motion for building the chest. And if you want to even just test that out yourself, get someone who doesn't know how to really connect to a muscle, who can make any exercise kind of work for him. Put him on a bench press, then put him on a hammer chest press. Ask him which one feels better. I guarantee you the person who has no experience will just, the hammer strength's way better. They don't know why. They don't understand the the mechanics and the physics like you might understand as a trainer, but he broke it all down in the book. And same thing with the squat. Again, if you're looking to train the whole body, it certainly does that. But most people squat to build their frontal legs, like their thighs, their quadriceps. And he basically showed why it was just a very poor motion for most people's leverages. And I know that from my own experience, that every time I squatted in a routine, like my butt grew, like I got glute activation, but it was never a great quad builder for me. But when he got people doing the sissy squats, man, you just torture legs doing that. And again, when he gets into the physics of it, it should have been self-evident to many of us. It wasn't to me. And I think it wasn't to a lot of people. And he was able to grow his legs and the legs of other people, and he never did squats. And again, get back to Vince Gironda. He had nobody barbell squatting. He produced people with fantastic legs, and he was also big on the sissy squat. And again, if you want to get into the physics of how it works, for most people, doing a sissy squat with their body weight, when you do the math on like the leverage points and how long their femur is and what's getting parallel to gravity and all these kind of things, you can put a tremendous amount of load onto those quadriceps with just your body weight. In fact, most people cannot do a body weight sissy squat. And then to get the same level of load, you might need 300-400 pounds on your back. And again, when he broke it down the way he did, it was very powerful. It was very interesting. And it just showed yet again that there's different things you need to be aware of if muscular hypertrophy and targeting a muscle is your main thing, as opposed to just a buddy in the corner there has got a big chest and I've seen him bench press, so I'll just do the same.
Yeah, and it drives me insane seeing, strength and conditioning coaches, especially in sports where you do have extremely tall athletes like basketball, things like that. When they're having those guys squat, it's like, what is the point of this even? I mean, the amount of load that they can use relative to their size is minimal at best, and there's so much stress that you're putting specifically on these guys who are already under a lot of load in their low backs a lot of times. But that's a totally separate issue altogether. But again, I think matching the body type with the exercise that's best for it almost goes back to our initial conversation, right? Like if you've got somebody that maybe moves really well in a deadlift or a squat or chest press, great, do it, add it in as part of their rotation. But there's not really a one size fits all unless that's your specific thing that you're interested in doing. I'd love to transition a little bit into, and I know this is a huge topic, so we'll try to keep it as succinct as we can. But just I guess, the art and the style of bodybuilding and the sport of bodybuilding. And I know there's so many different philosophies even underneath that umbrella. But talk to me a little bit about the sport and the style of bodybuilding. How would you define to somebody who's maybe just been exposed to their first pumping iron documentary, this style of training for somebody who's never heard of it or experienced it before?
Well, of course, bodybuilding isn't really a sport because there's no objective measure of how many goals are scored or anything like that. I don't like to call it a pageant because that kind of puts a negative connotation onto
They
some
do a little
people.
bit of dancing, though, a little bit of
A little bit
dancing.
dancing, but I what I respect the most about bodybuilding is the discipline it takes. There's truly no off days. But basically, the idea is the only thing that matters is the look of your body. Your strength doesn't matter. Your health certainly doesn't matter. It is only about how you look, and more specifically, how you look on a specific day. So getting into the condition that the judges are looking for, which nowadays is, you have to be ripped to the absolute bone if you have any chance of winning a competition. I'll get back on track in a second, but for those who don't know, the original bodybuilding competitions had not just weightlifting components to them, but actual mental tests. There was aptitude to it, and they were looking for the most developed person. And over time, it eventually turned to purely aesthetics. And I would love to see some sort of return to, hey, we're gonna not just how you look, but how strong are you, how smart you are. Maybe they even do health markers, which I think would be interesting. But that's in a galaxy far, far away.
Maybe you just start that yourself, Mike. That could be
Yeah,
Mr. STG.
the biggest problem with the bodybuilding, again, for those who don't know, is that the drug use is the most important thing. It's more important than the training. It's more important than the nutrition. And there are studies to this isn't just me talking. There are studies that basically show that the you can take the drugs, and they you would standardize the I think the ones that I read, I think they're giving guys 600 milligrams of testosterone every week, which would be above what a sports athlete would be getting. So I wouldn't necessarily call it an abusive dosage, but 600 milligrams of test is a pretty good dose for your average person. And they had them against people who weren't even people who were training, and they had people that were taking the stuff that weren't even training. And the results of just taking the stuff far surpassed the people who were even weight training. So it's more powerful. And I mean, even if you look at our industry, like the high intensity industry, we have a few people now where they've gone on the stuff, and they can call it TRT, HRT, which just means they're on a lower dose, and it's the best they've ever looked. And as long as they're open up front with it, that's fine. I got no issues with any of that. But when they start saying that it's their program or their diet that somehow got them there, when at 21 they didn't look anywhere near that good, like, hey, the drugs are that powerful. And the biggest problem with them for the average person who doesn't know much about this is they are dose dependent. The more you take, the better it works. And the more you take, the harder it is on your body. So when you see these guys who are 300 pounds of muscle and they die before they're 40, there's your cause and effect. There's your cost reward ratio there. If you want to be a champion at the highest level, I'm not saying they don't train hard I'm sure all the guys in the Olympia stage, the top 20 in the world, they're all training their asses off. I don't take that away from them. But you can look better than 99% of the population without resistance training by taking the drugs. So that has to be understood by the average person listening to your podcast. It's that important. But if we're going to go just talking about naturals, then obviously it's a combination of your dietary practices and your training practices, along with recovery. The old good water, fresh air, sunshine, like these things still play an important role in overall health and well being. I, at this point, have not come across any form of training that I thought was vastly superior to anything else, assuming that consistency is involved. Now, I think you need to hit a certain level of intensity. Do I think going beyond that is, really going to, do I think it's going to put extra 5 pounds of muscle on people? No, I don't. I think once that threshold's hit, they're probably good enough. When it comes to the volume, there's some studies to suggest that a little bit of extra volume will help. Again, I think it's relative to the person. I've seen people do a set where they just seem so into it, so concentrated, so intense that I don't think an extra set or two would have any additional benefit to them. I've seen lots of other people, they say, oh, I trained hard. I'm thinking, no, you could do 4 or 5 more reps. I think them doing some more volume is going to absolutely give them better results. Again, assuming that you're recovering, you're having good productive workouts. The only thing that I've ever saw, again, this isn't like world shattering stuff, but a little bit better, doing the negative only or the negative accentuated. In two different times in my lifting career, I was able to achieve better results relative to myself and relative to some of the people I did the experiments with. But it wasn't like I put 40 pounds of muscle on them. It wasn't like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. And some of the research would just suggest that even probably having that really heavy load in the stretch position was probably all that we were accomplishing anyways. I think that the program that allows you to be consistent over time is probably the greatest possible thing, whether you're bodybuilding or whether you're just trying for health, strength, and longevity. So, if training like Dorian Yates, who's just an absolute savage in the gym, appeals to you mentally and physically, and you can get into that mindset and you don't have to do as much, that's probably going to be the best thing for you. And from an effective standpoint and a time standpoint, I think trying to raise that intensity up so you're not spending as much time in the gym works well for a lot of people. But I have seen people, again, I don't want to call them lazy, but they just don't want to train that hard. They just don't want to do it. And if they have the time to do it more and they like being more social and they look good, then again, all the power to them. But I would say whatever program doesn't cause injury and allows you to be consistent over time is probably going to be the best fit for the average person.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why a lot of people are drawn to this style of higher volume training in the first place, and that dedication that it's very easy to see, even if somebody is on, like, we can talk about the amount of drugs that Ronnie Coleman was on, right? But you and I could take the same amount of drugs. We're not turning into Ronnie Coleman, right? Like there's a level of work and dedication and genetics, obviously, that play a huge factor in being at the upper echelon of that sport. And I think for a lot of us, I mean, I know for me, when I first got into strength training in the beginning, it was because I saw those guys. I saw that look, that physique that really drew me into like, oh my God, I wonder if I could look like that one day. And turns out no. But that sort of initial draw, I think, really brings a lot of men and potentially women into it too. And I think there's a lot to be gleaned from that dedication that comes from the consistency of bodybuilding. And I think you and I would both agree that, twice a day, training 6 days a week, plus, living your entire life around, chicken and rice and broccoli and the craziness that's sometimes involved with having that as a career is maybe a little overboard. But I think if the opposite of that is you're just sitting on the couch and you're not doing jack shit all day, then maybe being drawn into that world a little bit isn't the worst thing in the world. So what do you think that maybe are some takeaways that people, just regular trainees, could glean from the bodybuilding community? And then I think that's the perfect transition to sort of finish up this discussion and look at high intensity training, which I think for a lot of us is what we end up on after we've sort of tried the bodybuilding thing for a little while.
Well, I can kind of have a bit of a segue with the bodybuilding and the hit. One of my favorite Arthur Jones sayings is that bodybuilding is wasted on bodybuilders. What I believe he meant by that, this is obviously my take, is that the health benefits from strength and resistance training are it's hard to even fathom. I mean, we're living in a very great time where we have all these people at the academic level figuring out what it does to the brain, what it does to the muscles, what it does to the bones, what it does to the nervous system, what it does to gut health, what it does to just almost every overall function of the body, what it does for all cause mortality. It's probably one of the most powerful things we can do in our lives to just make sure that we are the strongest, healthiest, most vibrant version of ourselves. It's that powerful. And I don't even know if Arthur, for the genius level intelligence that he had, could have even come up with how right he was with that and how big strength training could be for everyone. If everyone engaged in a once a week full body strength training routine, I am willing to bet the healthcare system would be cut in half, maybe less. You would have so many more people from a physical and mental standpoint taking full ownership of their lives, which I think would be insanely powerful. I think we would have a world that would be almost unrecognizable by today's standard. I truly believe it's that powerful, and maybe I'm naive in that, but that is my belief at this time. So the actual process of bodybuilding, the pushing the body, the taking the resistance, to saying that, I am going to try to elect a change in my body, in my physiology, it changes every part of you. And through that change, people can become different versions of themselves, in my opinion, better versions of themselves. Now, again, taken to the extremes with the drugs and the pageantry and everything else, like, everything in this world, you can, make something that's really great, really bad. But for the average person, again, getting into the gym, saying for this, some people it's 10 minutes, some people it's 2 hours, but I'm going to take this time out of my day and I'm really going to do something safe and productive to push up my health. Like I said, it would be world changing, in my opinion. And I think you mentioned Dr. Doug McGuff. I watched him do a presentation at the Resistance Exercise Conference, which obviously we've both been to. He said it better than I did. He gave all the different stats. He had the nice PowerPoint presentation, and if that information ever became more mainstream, I shouldn't say there are people that are saying that you should be strength training. I tell people all the time, it was only 7-8 years ago in my career that I was still arguing with doctors whether their patients should be strength training, and now in the last 3, 4, 5 years, we're getting prescriptions for strength training. Doctors saying that they have to go into the gym, so things are moving in the right direction. But yeah, that bodybuilding is really, really powerful stuff when you take away the actual sport and the stage of it. But the actual process, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to eat these bad meals again and again and again. Cheat meal once in a while is fine, but maybe 4 or 5 days in a row, I'm going to eat high protein, nutritious meals that are from good sources. Well, maybe instead of staying up for an extra 2 or 3 hours watching that Netflix movie, no, I'm going to get that extra cup, obviously, because I know it's good for me. I know it's going to help me at the gym the next day. I know I'm going to feel better at the gym the next day. That's for me what the essence of bodybuilding is. That's, I think, the beginning of bodybuilding, if you want to look from a historical standpoint, was. And the more people that can bring that into their life, I think it's going to be, fantastic. It's going to be a boom for them. And then to get into high intensity training, I think for me, the essence of high intensity training is just, it's the first shot at trying to bring physics, biomechanics, logic, and some of these things, these higher level of intellectual thought processes into resistance training. If someone says, well, you got to do 20 sets per muscle group. Okay, why? Legitimate question. Why? Because, some champion did it. If you want to be a champion, you want to be like them. But, even like today's research would suggest that roughly half of that is probably optimal for hypertrophy. But, I was listening to a John Little talk on the subject, and he basically said something along the lines of, well, it took him this many years to get to, from 20 to 10. He says, well, it'll probably take about this many years to get from 10 to 5. And eventually he figures that they're going to kind of get to like Mike Metz. I'm paraphrasing, but the idea is the academia is already on a journey towards a more intense, abbreviated approach. And for those of us who didn't have the superior genetics, and for those of us who just for whatever reason decided not to take the anabolic assistance, I think both anecdotally and from a science standpoint, it starts moving towards the fundamentals of high intensity training, which again are we can't do this all day, every day, because we have a finite ability to recover from it. Once we have hit that threshold, whatever it may be for that particular person, we don't really have to do anything beyond it. There's no additional gains. It's not like, if I do 5 sets, I get this much. I get 10 sets, I get double. I get 20 sets, I get double. I get 40 sets. It doesn't work like that. We know there's a finite amount of resource. As long as the people in the high intensity community can't get so bogged down, it absolutely has to be this no matter what. And they can be open-minded as well to say that, okay, well, 1 set per muscle group doesn't appear to be the be all end all for most people. Okay, that's fine. Okay, well, maybe 10 sets is a lot for someone who's really training hard, really training their butt off. Okay, I get on board with that. And finding that there has to be a certain amount, but it doesn't have to be a huge amount. And there has to be a level of intensity, but maybe I don't have to go so friggin' crazy that my eyes are popping out of my head. Like it's just not going to give me that much more for that much effort. And just, again, for me, high intensity is just the first attempt at trying to bring rational thought into the science and now the academia of resistance exercise training.
Yeah, and I love that idea of rational thinking and rational thought. Just under that line of thinking, how has your understanding of HIIT evolved over the years? Because you've mentioned and kind of danced around this idea that there's still a lot of dogma in the industry, right? There's people who, read the Nautilus principles once and they've never veered off that course, and everything that AJ said is written in stone. And science has come out, and I think, like you mentioned, what John Little has said, and I put a little bit of weight on exercise science research, not all of the weight, right? I think, we've got some really smart people in the field, but it's a lot of bros who are getting science degrees and PhDs in exercise science, right? So it's people who maybe come from a bodybuilding background anyways, and they're looking for ways to sort of write in stone in the research that, hey, we actually do need this higher volume approach, or maybe this is better. And I'm generalizing here, but how has your thoughts as a HIIT practitioner sort of evolved away from it has to be this way to, it seems like you're pretty open to new evidence and to new ideas as they sort of come up. What has that shift sort of been like for you over the years?
Well, I've been steadfast for years that if someone were to walk into my gym and show me a training methodology, assuming that it was safe, that just drastically beat what we are currently doing with clients, I'd switch over overnight. Like, well, why would I? We'll get into the business aspect just a little bit here. Why would I, as a gym owner who makes his living off training people, use an inferior system when I'm in the open market? Because eventually someone will use that better system than me, and they will put me out of business. Like that, just I don't want to be the blockbuster to Netflix, right? So if someone comes up with something, it's like, holy shit, this is really good. Like, I mean, they're getting tremendously better results than, I want to switch. I want to be the first person to switch over to it. Now, again, when you look at the academia, it's certainly not trending upwards in terms of volume. It's trending downwards in terms of volume. Now, again, it's not going to trend down to zero. That would be foolish. But, could I see them eventually doing some studies where everyone in the study is over 50 and that volume really has to come down relative to testosterone levels, instead of most of these being college kids that they get to use for free because it's part of their degree? I'm just spitballing here, but maybe that shows differences, right? And again, I have probably about a dozen clients that are on the TRT. So we're talking probably about 150 milligrams of testosterone a week, somewhere in around there. Their results on the exact same program are drastically better. Their strength is better. Their recovery is better. Their muscle tone is better. Like it makes that kind of difference. So, and as the way I understand it, is they're just getting their testosterone back to what it was in their early to mid 20s, as opposed to taking super doses of this stuff, right? So, if all these studies are using people that are essentially in their physical prime, there's no doubt in my. I know that I'm coming up on 40 now. I know that I could have handled a higher training volume then than I can now. I still consider myself to be in pretty good shape, but again, whether maybe it's motivation, maybe it was just more time, maybe didn't have as many things to deal with in my life, but I certainly could have and probably would have even enjoyed more gym time back then compared to now. I've said this to several of my clients. I said, well, even if, say, a lot of people I see, they see once or twice a week full body training, so about 10 exercises, give or take. And I say to them, well, let's say that third workout a week would give you better results. Just for a second, we'll assume that finances are not a problem. They could pay to see me twice a day if they wanted to. It still has to fit within your schedule. It still has to fit within like what you're trying to accomplish. For a lot of people I see them once a week, and they've had that same time spot for like a decade. So it's so ingrained into their schedule that even if training twice or three times a week would yield better results, they may or may not have been able to continue that for 10 years. Now, what is going to be more beneficial? Them training the same time once a week for 10 years, or them training three times a week for 6 months, maybe 3 months? Like it has to fit within. I joke with my clients all the time, and I'm no different. We're all too busy in North America. Every single one of us, we're too busy. It's a constant struggle. We got so much crap going on. My girlfriend always takes a look at my cell phone because sitting beside me all the time, and it glows like a Christmas tree. There's 20 different platforms. People always trying to go, and you have to try to prioritize what you can when you can. But like it's never empty. And like, should I be that busy? Probably not. And same goes for almost everybody else. And there's a lot of things that realistically aren't that important. I like to say, well, if it's not something that you're going to make a phone call about, like you actually got to talk to somebody about, it's probably not that important. And that's just the world we live in. So getting back to what I said earlier, whatever the program that is consistent for you, assuming you're not hurting yourself, is probably just going to be the best program. And then everything else, you're probably fighting over the last maybe 10, 15%. But just getting something consistent is going to give you the biggest slice of the pie.
Yeah, and I think that's where something like HIT really shines. And I'm sure you would agree as a practitioner and somebody who sort of specializes in that area with your clients is, it's is two better than one? Maybe. There's some research to show that. Is three better than two? Maybe, probably not much more. But you know what's better than nothing? One, right? And if you can stay consistent to that, gosh, you're going to get so many benefits. And again, the long term ramifications of staying consistent. I think that's, we could have a whole separate conversation and podcast about consistency and what people can actually commit to, and how big of a bite of the health apple are you actually willing to take. And just getting your foot in the door, I think, is so important for some people. And that's where this podcast, I hope, helps some people, in the sense of, there's so much information out there. You see these fitness influencers and you think you have to work out twice a day, 5 days a week, to have this physique. And maybe that's what it takes, plus drugs probably, to look like these fitness influencers out there. But if the goal is just to feel better and look better, a little bit better, right? And maybe, add some additional positive habits over time, the bar for entry is so low. And it doesn't seem like that if you were to just go on social media and start scrolling through fitness influencers' pages. It seems like it's very complex. And that's how people are selling programs. That's how they're getting money out of people. But man, just go work out once a week, do some big compound lifts, work hard. And then the next time you come in, try to work a little bit harder than that, right? And the next time you come in, try to do that again. And you don't have to do it every single day. If all your goal is feel a little better, look a little better, live a little longer, get some of these benefits of strength training. There's so much to be gleaned from just such a small. It's a lot of effort, but it's a small actual time investment. And I think people
Yeah.
totally underestimate, or I guess overestimate, what it takes to actually start seeing results. So I think that's where something like HIT really shines. Is there anything else you have to add to that, or any other things that you think maybe people can use from a HIT perspective if they're just getting started, that they could add into their training before I let you go?
Well, I'll finish off with this. A few years back, I was lucky enough to talk to Gary Jones. So, for those who don't know, that's Arthur Jones's son, and he was one of the creators of hammer strength machines. And very, very smart guy. I very much enjoyed picking his brain on things. And he told me, and I don't mean to pick on America because I'm sure the stats are probably exactly the same for Canada. I just don't have them. But he was claiming that 90% of Americans engage in no form of exercise at all. Nothing. So even when we're talking about exercise in general, not even strength training versus other forms of exercise and trying to get the most out of it, we're at best talking to 10% of the population. Now, let's say that half the people that exercise engage in resistance training, and that might even be low too. I don't really know. So, out of those 5%, if you just show up and do a rational, reasonable program, you're in the top few percentage of the, probably biggest, strongest, richest country in the world. Like, I mean, talk about how low that entry is. And it's fun for guys like me and you to sit down and talk about, how do we get those last 10%? How do I get that last quarter inch or half inch on my arms and stuff like that? And what machine just absolutely feels the best over something. I love talking about that stuff. But when, you talk about earlier in the podcast, looking from 30,000 feet, if you just get into the gym and do a reasonable program, you're in the top few percentage. And I think that's something that, as all of us as practitioners in this, have to keep in mind, and also try to, not just because you want to be successful business wise, but generally most people get into this because they're trying to help people. If you're thinking about every person that get into the door, it's just going to be a better version of themselves. Like, hey, I don't have time to go on Facebook and argue because this guy's lifting too slow, or this guy's lifting too fast, or this guy's doing too much, or this guy's doing too little, or whatever. If you're actually busy, you don't got time for that kind of crap anyways. All you should be focusing on is getting somebody in the door. Because you know what? Even the person that's going to a gym where they do a methodology that I think is ridiculous is still doing better than 90% of the population. You got to keep these things in mind.
Yeah, I think there's so much more alike than there is different, and that's one of the things that I've really started to come around to over the course of my training career, is that, like you said, there's we're all fighting for this same small percentage of people who are even doing anything, and the reality is we need to open the barrier of entry to everyone else. And if we could get that next 10% and the next 10% to join in, I don't disagree. In fact, I think you might underestimate the amount of change in the medical costs of our countries if we could get 50% of Americans to exercise even once per week, to resistance train in a high intensity style fashion, or even any sort of fashion that's safe, right? Assuming that it's mostly biomechanically safe. Gosh, what a difference
It,
in
it
the
would
world that would
save your
make.
country. And I'm not even trying to say that your country needs it, but it would save your country and my country as well. A 50% world where everybody every week was trying to actively get a little bit stronger and a little bit better. It would fundamentally change everything around us.
Yeah, and that does remind me of that Doug McGuff conversation, which was ironic because he was sort of spelling out. This was in 2019, so he was sort of giving us a warning about COVID before it came. It was a little prophetic about saying how unhealthy the American system is, and how it's just going to take one thing to sort of cause it to crumble a little bit, and that's kind of what happened. And I think the message there was that exercise could save the world, and I still truly believe in that. And it's encouraging to see that you're experiencing now doctors recommending things like resistance training. And the new company I'm working with, we're talking specifically with doctors about teaming up and finding clients and patients that they can sort of prescribe an exercise dose, if you want to call it that, too, because we know there's so many benefits that aren't in pill form, that come from doing something like hard resistance training just once or twice per week. So, just to sort of wrap up here, Mike, and I'd love to get your thoughts before we do. I think it really just comes down to preference. Like, what do you like? What are your goals? What are you actually willing to commit to? Because if powerlifting gets you in the door and you like the idea of competing and you've got the perfect physique for it, hey, go for it. If you're going from the couch to the gym, I think that's awesome. I think finding the right tools to match that goal that you have. If you have the ability to go to Ontario, or where are you guys? Are you in Hamilton? Is that right?
We're in Paris, Ontario. We're about
In
half an hour
Paris.
from Hamilton.
Hamilton, right? So if you're in Paris, Ontario, I know a place that you could go that's got all the tools you could ever want. There's really no one size fits all approach. It's all about experimentation, and I think challenging conceptions is key. But just doing something and doing what you like that's helping you see progress, and then just do something where you can train hard and be safe and have fun. Anything else to add to that before I let you go? I'd love you to tell our listeners a little bit more about STG, where they can learn more, and then if they are in Canada, how they can stop in for a workout.
So if you're looking for us online, we're on Instagram at Mecca of the North. Any Google search for STG Strength and Power will bring everything up. We have all the websites and Facebooks and all that stuff. I don't spend as much time on that as I used to. I find that I don't know. It's become a place where it used to be where you could connect to like-minded people and you had some pretty good discussions, where it's just people are absolutely out of their minds now for the most part, and people again talk in ways that they would never talk in real life. And even in our small circle, the people that argue with each other, when realistically they should almost be best friends because they're 95% of the way there, and that 5% they just can't get over. I don't think that's a real life condition. I think that's a digital condition. Like, I think that's an online thing. But certainly using online to get a hold of us in the first place, and hopefully you can come in person and see the facility. We've been very fortunate to have people from all kinds of different places in the world, different countries, come in. I've been able to host them for a day, and it's been fun learning from them. And hopefully, we're able to teach them something as well. And the whole thing has just been a lot of fun. It's been a great journey, and I know from a business standpoint, getting in the fitness industry isn't always the easiest thing to do, but it's, at least my opinion at this point, it's one of the most rewarding things you can do, because I truly believe there is nothing out there right now yet. We see what medical science brings about, more important than strength training. I think it should be the bedrock of everybody's being, their health and well-being, their weekly routine. I don't think there's anything that's more important and more powerful. So even if you can't do it with me in Ontario, we have a network of people all over the place that are just very, very smart at what they do. They got some fantastic facilities, And I just find that, when you kind of start reaching out into that world, start talking to people, like everything else, it opens up to you. And I strongly encourage, if anyone's listening that are on the fence, maybe they haven't strength trained before, just get into a gym, get a trainer, maybe do your due diligence and look into them, make sure that, they're pretty smart. And there's a lot of very smart trainers out there, and just get started. That's been one of my biggest messages for years and years and years. Fitness, life, business, you name it, just get started. It's big. It's a big thing you do.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. And if anybody who's listening does have the opportunity to go up there, please, look up STG. They're doing great work, and it is rewarding. And I think we do have an opportunity to really affect people in a way that most people don't get to in the course of their day to day lives. So I am truly grateful for that. And sometimes it seems overwhelming, and we're barely making a dent. But I think people like you are out there doing the Lord's work, and I'm trying to do it myself, and hopefully we can have a little bit of an impact. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Mike, and thank you everyone for listening. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you again soon on Exercise is Bullshit.